Anansi's hat-shaking dance. You see, a long time ago in Africa, spiders had long flowing hair. They were not bald like they are now. They had long flowing hair, and they had a skinny little body. Well, Anansi the spider, with his long flowing hair, was sitting in his house eating food, eating a sandwich, and he heard a knock on the door. "Oh, who could that be?" Anansi said, and he got up and he went to the door and he opened the door. And there, standing in front of him, was his brother-in-law, his wife's brother. "Oh, Anansi," he said, "I have terrible news." And Anansi said, "Oh, what is the news?" And he said, "Oh, Anansi, your dear mother-in-law, your wife's mother, she is a poisonous spider, like we all are." And he said, "Well, yes, we are poisonous." "Yes." He said, "Well, she had an accident the other day. She was eating her supper and she bit her tongue. And of course, being a poisonous spider, she died." "Oh," Anansi said, "I can't believe it. That's the worst news I've ever heard in my whole life. I will tell my wife. You see, she must go and be with you all in the village." And he said, "Okay, you tell your wife and send her along, and you come along too, because we must have her funeral." And Anansi said, "Okay, farewell, brother-in-law," and he sent him on his way. Well, he went and told his wife, and she started crying, and she said, "Oh, Anansi, we must go." And Anansi said, "Well, should we pack some food first?" And she said, "Oh, no, Anansi. No, we do not pack food when we go to a funeral. You see, in my village, the custom is, if you have a funeral, nobody is to eat all day until after the funeral, until the day afterwards. It's called fasting." And Anansi said, "Oh, fasting? Well, that sounds terrible." You see, because to Anansi, food was his favorite thing. And he thought, "Oh, I can't go without food." And then he got an idea. He thought, "I'll tell you what, good wife, why don't you head on over to the village? You must go right now, and I, being your wonderful devoted husband, I will clean up the whole house for you, so that when we come back from the funeral, it will be all clean for us." And she said, "Oh, Anansi, you are such a good husband. Thank you for that." And she walked off down the path to her mother's village. Well, Anansi, when she was out of sight, he started cleaning out the house. He cleaned out all of the cabinets and all of the cupboards of all the food. And guess where he put it? In his mouth. In his mouth. He put it right in his mouth. He ate it, and he ate it, and he ate it, until he was stuffed, and he was no longer having a skinny body like a regular spider in those days. He had a big, fat, round, shiny belly. "Oh," he said. Oh, he patted his tummy, and he goes, "I probably could go 3 days without eating a bite of food. Everybody will think I am so good at fasting." And he waddled off down the path to his wife's mother's village. When they got there, everybody was sitting around crying over the dead mother spider's body. "Oh, she's gone. I can't believe it." And Anansi came in, and he cried the loudest. "Oh, this is terrible. Oh, I can't believe she had this accident." And people looked at Anansi, and he said, "Wow, Anansi, you're very good at crying. You should do this professionally." And Anansi said, "Oh, thanks. I know." Well, people, they had a big dance. And they said, "Anansi, before we have our funeral, we must have a big dance. And we will go down and we will dance. Do you know how to dance?" And Anansi said, "Oh, do I know how to dance? I am the greatest dancer in all of our village," because Anansi liked to brag about things. And so they went down to the field, and they got in a big circle, and they danced the dance, and it went like this. Oh, wow. His family said, "My goodness, Anansi, you are such a good dancer. You should do that professionally." And Anansi said, "Oh, thanks. I know." Well, they danced and they danced and they danced until they were all tired. And then they went back to the village, and they picked up the casket that carried the body of Anansi's mother-in-law, and they buried her in the ground. And they cried and cried, but nobody louder than Anansi, of course. And they all went back to the village, where there was no food to be eaten because everybody was fasting. They were fasting and not eating. And Anansi was fasting. And he said, oh, how could I eat at a time like this? And so everybody said, well, yes, Anansi, it's a terrible time. And they all went to bed. Well, when they woke up in the morning, they had made a great big feast of bean stew. And they'd laid it out on a big table in big pots. And Anansi and his family went out and sat down and started to eat. But of course, Anansi, his stomach was still stretched really big. And when the pot came to him, he just passed it over and said, oh, how could I eat at a time like this? Oh, and he started crying. My mother-in-law just one day buried and dead in the grave. And his family said, oh, Anansi, you are very good at crying and mourning and fasting. You should do this professionally. And they ate their bean stew. Well, afterwards, they went down to the field to dance again and said, well, we must dance because it is what we do every day. And so they got in a big circle and they sang. Oh, Nancy, they said, you are very good at dancing, especially the way that big wobbly round belly of yours wobbles when you dance. None of us have something like that. And Nancy said, oh, thanks. I know it's my speciality. And they said, well, that's very good. So we should go back and have more feast. And then Anansi said, oh, how could I eat at a time like this? So Anansi did not eat anything that whole rest of that day. And they went to bed. And they all slept. And when they woke up, Anansi was starting to get a little bit hungry because he had not eaten in 2 days. But he was still okay. So he went down, and they said the family had laid out big bowls of bean stew. And when it came to Anansi, Anansi looked at that bean stew and he said, oh, I could not eat this, not at a time like this. What with my mother-in-law just buried and dead in the grave 2 days. And they said, oh, Anansi, as they ate their bean stew, this bean stew is delicious. You are really good at mourning. You should do this professionally. And he said, oh, thanks. I know. Well, when it came time to dance, Anansi went down and he danced with the music, but it wasn't quite as good as it had been before. And they sang, and his family said, well, Anansi, you're dancing okay. Are you feeling all right? And Anansi said, oh, no, I am just feeling a little weak because, oh, my mother-in-law, she is. And they said, she's buried and dead in the grave just for 2 days. Yeah, we know, Anansi. Really, you should eat something. And he said, no, I cannot. So that night, they all went to bed, and Anansi went to bed too. But he went to bed kind of hungry. And he didn't sleep very well that whole night. He tossed and he turned and he dreamed of delicious food because now, even though his stomach had been stretched out and was big and round and shiny, it was empty in there. And Anansi just could not get a good night's sleep. So when he woke up early in the morning, the first thing he smelled was delicious cooking bean stew. Oh, he said, oh, bean stew, that would be so delicious. My big round belly is empty. I must fill it with something. So he crawled down to the kitchen, and he found there was a great big pot sitting on the stove, and it was full of bubbling, delicious bean stew. Oh, and Nancy said, you know, it is so early, nobody else is awake. What if I get a big spoonful of this stew, and I'll eat some of it, and nobody will know that I ate it, and then I can pretend that I am fasting and not eating, and my family will think that I am so cool. Well, he took off his hat, and he picked up a big spoon that was sitting next to the pot, and he scooped it up, and he was just about to put it in his mouth when he heard something behind him, and it was his whole family that had come down to the kitchen to see what had made a little bit of noise. And they said, Anansi! What are you doing here? Well, Anansi froze. He thought, oh, if they see that I am sneaking food, they will think that I've been sneaking food this whole time. I can't let them see that. So, thinking very quickly, he put the beans in his hat, and he put the hat on his head. Now, the beans were very hot, and they burned into his head. They burned into his head. And he started to shake the hat to keep the beans from burning the same spot. And so he was shaking his hat. And he turned around and said, "Well, hello, family," while shaking his hat. And the family said, "Oh, well, good morning, Anansi. Why are you shaking your hat?" And Anansi looked at them and he said, "Oh, this? Well, you see, this is my hat-shaking dance, because in my village there is the hat-shaking festival, and I always win because I'm a very good hat-shaking dancer." And they said, "Oh, Anansi, well, I bet you would win with a dance like that." And he says, "Well, I better be off." And the family said, "No, wait, Anansi. You should eat something before you go." And Anansi said, "Oh, no. How could I eat at a time like this, with my mother-in-law dead in the grave? What is it, 3 days now? Yeah, whatever. I better be going, family." And the family said, "Oh, no, Anansi, before you go, show us your hat-shaking dance." And so Anansi said, "Okay, fine. I show you my hat-shaking dance." And the family started to sing. Anansi, 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 do your hat-shaking dance. Anansi, 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 do your hat-shaking dance. He said, "Well, that was good, isn't it?" And the family said, "Yes, that's very good. Oh, you will win first prize," because by now the beans were burning into his skull, and he could hardly keep still, and said, "Well, I've got to go now. Don't want to be late." And he ran out of the village, and he started running through the fields. And he got to a field, and the beans were burning into his head, and they were so hot he could hardly stand it. He stopped to take off his hat, and he heard rustling in the grass behind him. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. "Oh, Anansi, why are you stopping?" It was his family again. He turned around and said, "Oh, well, hello, family." And he was shaking his head very violently because the beans were so hot they felt like lava burning into his skull. And he said, "Oh, family, I just stopped to, practice again." And they started singing, and Anansi was jumping up and down because the pain was getting to him. And he sang, "Anansi, Anansi, Anansi, do your hat-shaking dance. Anansi, 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 do your hat-shaking dance." "Okay, family, well, I better be off." And he ran as fast as he could through the jungle and through the grasses. But as fast as he ran, his family was always right there behind him. He kept turning around, and they were there. His hat was shaking, and the beans were burning. And finally, he stopped, and he pulled the hat off. He could take it no longer, and he threw it on the ground, and he scraped off the beans. "Ow, ow, ow," he said. And his family behind him, you could hear them gasp, "Oh, Anansi! Look at your head! Oh, Anansi!" And they all pointed at his head. And Anansi felt up with his hands. His head, all of the hair on his head had been burned right off. And his skull was smooth and shiny as a bowling ball. "Oh, no!" And they said, "Anansi, it serves you right. You lied to us. You have been sneaking food this whole time." And Anansi said, No, really, I didn't." And they said, "Anansi, if you do it once, we think you do it all the time." And Anansi said, "I know. I am sorry. I have deceived you." And they said, "That's right. You have deceived us. You should be ashamed." And he was. He was very ashamed. And he said to the grass, he turned to the tall grass and he said, "Oh, tall grass, please hide me." And he crawled off into the tall grass, and he covered his bald head. Now, they say, in Africa, if you are walking through the tall grass, and you see a spider clinging to the tall grass, and he's got a bald head and a big round belly, that you should not touch him. Because, number one, he is just a Anansi, and he wants to be left alone because he felt ashamed about fooling his family. And number two, he's very poisonous, and if you touch him and he bites you, you will die. And that is the end of our story.